Oh, hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee on a rare noontime live cast and podcast. Hope everybody's having a great Friday and a great end to another week. And with us today is meteorologist Bill Goodman of the National Weather Service in Upton, New
Yep,
York.
when I'm working, that's where I'm from. That's thanks, Joe.
So we're going to do all things tropics, at least to start off with. And before we start bringing up maps and satellites and everything else, what is your take on the fact that we are at a record-setting pace here, where with regards to already at our the eighth named storm, which was Hanna, made a tropical storm last night. The It had until August 2nd to get to the eighth storm to set that record. So we blew that away by almost 9 days. What's your take on this early activity, and does is it one of these instances? Does past performance, is that an indicator of future outcome, or not? Because we know that this could just as easily shut off down the road, even though we're going now into the peak, shortly heading into the peak part of hurricane season.
Yeah, and I suppose it may shut off from time to time. I think we saw that. Didn't we have like a brief respite before things started picking up again? I suppose that could happen like after we get through maybe early mid August. Maybe things could quiet down. I don't know. Of course, I didn't expect things to happen in the Gulf this week either. So it's just full of surprises and. It's just I mean, it's uncharted waters in one way in terms of the number of storms. Sometimes I wonder in years past when we didn't have satellites to find the slightest the tiniest circulation, whether we there's probably a lot of missed storms in the past record too.
Well,
Past seasons might.
that is a point that we've made a number of times. Once upon a time, there. I know for the young folk, it's hard to believe that once upon a time there wasn't a YouTube, and there were only four or five channels on a television set that you had to turn by hand, and there weren't any satellites. So yeah, I mean,
You
if
had
you
to read
go,
Weatherwise magazine to find out about any of this stuff.
or even if you go far enough back, what about storms that were one of the in the open waters out in the middle of the Atlantic? A storm like Gonzalo, for example, which really is very small. And you remember last year, I think it was the B storm Beryl, that where gales were something like 15 miles. I mean, the thing was basically the size of a severe thunderstorm.
Yeah,
Uh,
we had better thunderstorms last night out east.
right. I mean, how many of those might have slipped under the radar over time? So yeah, in a way it is apples to oranges. What do you think about the? I've been making the point that the activity in the East Pacific has been unusually quiet, and even though we have major Hurricane Douglas that is bound for Hawaii, and we could take a look at that as well in just a little bit. Uh, the whole eastern half of the Pacific basin has been. We're almost to August, and they haven't even had a hurricane yet.
Yeah, seems to work out that way. Eastern Pacific quiet, Atlantic active, and vice versa. So just sort of following the usual script there.
And there are instances where both sides are working together with activity, but most of the time it's either or. So let's start with, how about we start with Hannah, because that's the one that at least is the closest to the U.S. coast. And as you said, Hanna formed in a way that Gulf of Mexico storms form sometimes. They start off as just a mass of clouds and just some disturbed weather, and then very slowly but surely they start to take on the look of a tropical depression or a tropical storm. And of course, it's all landlocked. Uh, I don't. Looking at the upper air with this, and I'm going to bring up the full U.S. The full tropical Atlantic satellite, and you can see Hannah's on the upper left there. Uh, the that, like as you said, that was something that really was not anticipated. And actually, Bill, when you look at things this week with regards to the weather models, we all kind of gravitate to see what the weather models are doing if they're spinning up things out in the ocean. They missed Gonzalo, and they missed this one in the Gulf.
Well, Gonzalo is so tiny that I'm not surprised it would miss that. The thing in the Gulf, though, is interesting. That I saw long range models just had. I mean, they had high pressure off to the northeast, and I guess just like I guess the trade winds over the Gulf, but they had they had pretty consistently lower pressures in that area. Like it was begging for something. Like the models were begging for something to develop, but wouldn't do it. And then
And
finally,
that's by the way because we have this east-west ridge. Anytime, it's been my view. Anytime you have a ridge over the southern part of the United States where the highest pressures are well up to the north, not in the Gulf of Mexico per se, but the highest pressures are running, say, across the Tennessee Valley or into the Carolinas, and then maybe extending back up into North Texas and Oklahoma. That creates an environment where pressures are lower than normal in the Gulf of Mexico. So all you need is some kind of little ripple to get going. And I'm looking at the I got the Gulf loop up now, a tight of Hanna. Uh, Looks like it's still organizing slowly but surely. I think it has a little bit of time here where it might pick up some additional strength.
probably, and the Hurricane Center tends to be a little bit behind the curve in terms of intensity with the system. So could end up stronger. Would it be a hurricane? I don't know. I don't think so.
There's not. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of time since it's moving up toward the Texas coast. So I'm thinking here with this that this is primarily the big issue here is going to be rain.
Yeah, heavy rain. Texas coast, South Texas. Not a Harvey for them. I'm sure everyone's very happy about that.
Right, because once this goes in, it's going to keep on moving. I've got a wide view of the radar, and at the moment, we're seeing some broken patches of showers from the Florida Panhandle, you know, rotating up northwestward. You could actually see the counterclockwise turning in the Western Gulf, but there doesn't appear to be any rain on land at the moment. Why don't I let's take a look and see what the reconnaissance aircraft, if there's anything out there. We've got a Gonzalo recon, by the way, that's on its way there. So we'll see if maybe later on we'll get a little bit more data. Mission 4 into Hanna. I'm just checking here. It doesn't look like I'm on Tropical Tidbits, folks. If you go on tropicaltidbits.com and go to Aircraft Recon, this is Levi Cowan's great site that you can get all this information, including the reconnaissance aircraft. This is Gonzalo's, the latest aircraft there. Looks like he's not even close to it yet. The plane, the little plane icon is at 11 north and 56 west. This thing is barely at 10 north.
They'll go out that way and say, did we just pass it? It's that small.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see what they do find when they get there, because it did look a little ragged on the satellite yesterday. I'm going to let's bring up the Hurricane Center's forecast. Let's go to Hanna and on their latest advisory from the Hurricane Center. That's Gonzalo. Hang on a second. And they got multiple storms here. It's always I got to make sure I click the right maps. So here we have it at 27.2, 93.2, top winds 45 miles an hour, moving west at west northwest at 9. Looks like they bend it west and then turn it just south of west and landfall somewhere around Corpus Christi during the day tomorrow.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Corpus Christi, yeah, and then there's the old cone of uncertainty that could end up maybe 50, 60 miles up, or the center could make landfall 50, 60 miles up or down the coast from there. So, it was interesting. A few days ago, I saw some models take this all the way across Mexico and into the Pacific, but I haven't seen that lately. It seems like it just dissipates over eastern, the mountains of eastern Mexico.
Yeah, that's what they're doing with it. It's pretty far north for it to go all the way across and come out the other. I mean, it does occasionally happen, but it is pretty far north. It would come out on the other side somewhere around 25 or somewhere just south of 25 degrees north. So it has maybe a minimal chance of surviving that whole trip. Although every once in a while you do get some of these weird things that hold maybe a very tiny identity, and then they go out on the Pacific side, and then they might reform for a short time.
Yeah, that tends to be farther south. I think if this thing had like a circulation like was it Cristobal, that thing was huge.
Cristobal.
Yeah, and I mean it was not gonna that thing, even when it had weakened for a time, it was just the nature of that thing. You knew it was going to come back and be a tropical storm. Yeah, I think it needs something that robust, to move across and keep its act together.
Now, I just brought up the GFS here, and we've got the models still we're having a tough time make in a time where these things like to spin things up uh, and exaggerate in the other direction. This one's still struggling, can't even print an L, but it does have the closed isobars coming in around Corpus Christi. Actually takes it down on the new GFS. It's got it down to about a 997 or 8, and then turns it southwestward, and then it goes into the mountains, and then it just kind of sits there. Uh, there is a little bit of an identifiable low that almost makes it to the coast of Mexico on the Pacific side, but then it just gets hung up and then it's gone. So Hanna will play its role in bringing rains into Texas. The fact that it's moving along, as you said, doesn't really make this a Harvey concern. The upper air, to me, this upper ridge, when we had Harvey, as I recall, you had a split ridge. You had a high pressure. You had a ridge on the east side of it, and I'm going to draw it over now. I'm going to draw on the GFS just as I'm kind of doing it from memory, and it was sort of trapped between one upper high that was in the southeast and another upper high that was back over around New Mexico, Arizona, and there was this big hole in the middle where it was basically in no man's land and a no flow. You don't have that in this particular case. The
Yeah, yeah, much different,
Yeah, there's the
much
outline,
different.
the outline of the ridge. The upper high essentially is cradling this, and it's moving right along the southern periphery of it. So there's no real danger here of any bizarre outcome.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. They have a good handle on it.
All
Weird. I,
right.
I see the GFS trying to do something east of Florida there for a short time, not too long from, well, I guess north of Hispaniola and then east of Florida, and it doesn't really get its act together. That's
Right, right. Okay, so let's go to Gonzalo and see what's going on. I'm going to try to get a loop up here, one of these floater loops, and take a look at again the big story with this to me was the fact that it developed relatively quickly, and then it looked like it was going to maybe make it to minimal hurricane, and then it just got ragged. And this is something that happens with these small systems. They're very volatile, and you have a really tough time. Um, you have a really tough time with them because you get a little dry air, it gets trained into the circulation, and suddenly what looked organized looks disheveled. It doesn't look too shabby right at the moment, but it's one ball of convection. That's all it is.
Mhm. Yeah, and those tiny things. The flip side is true. Sometimes some plane get in there and find a big surprise in there and get rocked around a little bit. So I guess the Hurricane Center's take on this. It seems like they're just taking a cautious approach because they really don't know. Better
Right.
to be safe than sorry with putting up hurricane watches for the southern windwards, and better if it doesn't happen than to be caught off guard.
I'm trying to get a better satellite view here, but having a tough time. Let me see if this one works. Nope. This is just a daytime shot. The geo color for some reason is not. is not cooperating with me. So is it in the view? It's actually on the Caribbean shot that they have. It's coming in on the lower right, so you can see it. That is really, it's so small. It is so small. It could go into those southern windwards. If you're not within 50 or 60 miles of the center, you're probably not going to see anything out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way I look. Yeah, very tiny. Doesn't, it's the sort of thing that was, like we were saying, in years past, that might have escaped everybody's attention.
All right. I'm going to jump over to the tropical Atlantic shot again. And there is a wave that is coming off the coast. When you watch the tropical Atlantic satellite during the course of the month of July, it's in an above normal hurricane season. It's very interesting to see the transition that occurs with regards to the look at the beginning of the month versus the look at the end of the month, and you look for that. What we used to call the ITCZ, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, the area of clouds and showers that's usually lying just north of the equator, watching that migrate northward because it needs to get up above 10 degrees north for these things to spin up. Correct? That's because of the Coriolis.
Yeah, for the most part. In the Pacific Ocean, a little bit different story, but yeah, it is kind of pretty far south, way south of the Cabo Verdes. That's yeah, so that's why I think it's got a ways to go. It's got to gain some latitude before it develops.
I'm not seeing too much in the way of Saharan dust. That was certainly evident back a couple of weeks ago, but it looks as if that has now waned a bit.
I think so. I'm looking at the visible. I'm not sure if there's some dust to the north of it. It's hard to make out. It just looks a little fuzzier there in the visible. So
well, let's see if I can I'll bring up a water vapor here, and we'll try that. Hang on a second. We'll go to the tropical Atlantic this way. Hang on. We'll water vapor. Now, if I got the water vapor imagery, there is a lot of dry air north of Gonzalo. Quite a bit, actually. It's all in that dark blue that you see, folks. This is that is dry air. The environment, oddly enough, one of the interesting things on the water vapor, Bill, is the fact that I'm looking. When you look toward the African coast and going up well to the north, up to the Canary Islands, there's not a whole lot of. There's very little dry air in that environment. It looks like that part of the Atlantic is saturating quite a bit. But you see that dark blue that's from the leewards eastward, probably from about 15 degrees north and points northward. A lot of dry air there. And also just to the north and west of it, there's a little patch of dry air. And this is going to be a problem with a small system like this because that dry air can easily get entrained into the circulation.
Yeah, fight that. It's even got to fight. The South American landmass doesn't look too dry once you get away from once you go farther west into the Caribbean, but it just tends to. I think that dry air and the proximity of South America is probably going to lead to some weakening when this thing gets into the Caribbean.
All right, so let's bring up the Hurricane Center's forecast for Gonzalo. And that is, it's been pretty much a straight line forecast. It really hasn't varied very much. We've got tropical storm warnings up for the Windward Islands and for Barbados. So you see the track here, no longer bringing this to hurricane strength. It had an opportunity and it missed it. Moving west at 18, so moving a little bit faster than what it's been. Crosses the windwards during the day tomorrow, and then in the Eastern Caribbean, forecast to become a depression over time and probably a remnant low. What is it in the Eastern Caribbean where most of the time, what is it about the Eastern Caribbean? Maybe you can explain why it is you get these storms sometimes that they approach the windwards and leewards, and then once they get into the Eastern Caribbean, they have a really tough time staying together.
Well, normally in the month of July is usually a lot of easterly shear in the Caribbean, and that Storms can't fight that. I think if they stay too close to South America too, I don't know if they entrain low level dry air. I mean, you can't really see that on the water vapor.
But but a lot of times there's a lot of westerly shear going on in the in the Eastern Caribbean.
West. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean,
I
yeah.
said easterly.
You meant
Westerly.
okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the westerly shear, and you get the blow off from a lot of times you get thunderstorms that develop there on the north coast of South America, and you get this blow off. You can see the easterly winds at the lower levels of the atmosphere. See those clouds going from east to west. And at the same time, you'll see like 40 or 50 knots of westerly shear blowing the middle and higher cloud tops from west to east.
All right.
There you go. I lost you there for a second.
Oh no, I'm still here. Still here. Looking at some maps too to see if what kind of shear is going on in the Eastern Caribbean.
Well, I could see there's I just brought the water vapor imagery back. I'm looking at once you get to maybe about 65 west. It looks like there's some kind of upper low that's sitting south of Hispaniola. So there are clouds that are coming off the coast of, like near from Curacao, and then going southwest to northeast. So there's something over there. If it doesn't get out, it doesn't look like that upper low is moving very much. So that might be one of the reasons why this thing may have a tough, may get sheared apart once it gets into the Eastern Caribbean.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, right now there's 20 to 25 knots of westerly shear that's in the east, sitting in the Eastern Caribbean near that upper low. So unless that upper low were to move westward in tandem with it, yeah, the environment doesn't look too good.
And Hanna on the upper left of this water vapor imagery, you see it there in a Gulf of Mexico that looks like it's pretty saturated. Because it looks like there's not a lot of dry air in the Gulf of Mexico at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in a pretty good environment from that respect.
Yeah, I think so. So that's why it's gonna dump a lot of rain on somebody, but thank God it's gonna keep moving along or just dissipate. It's not gonna be anything like a Harvey.
And the wave off the African coast, actually judging from the water vapor imagery, it's actually not a half bad looking wave.
That thing looks pretty good. That's gonna be it's gonna be something to watch as it moves across. May not do much right now, but once it gets closer to the leewards or the windwards, it could start to. That's when I think it could start to ramp up, and it'll be interesting to see what that ends up doing.
All right, let's switch to the Pacific. Let's take a look at Douglas because we've got a hurricane that is headed for Hawaii, and we've got that. I got the Pacific loop up. Let's just let me put a few extra frames on this, and you can watch the sunrise going from east to west. When you go to the dayside shot, still looking actually fairly well developed, just marching along on a west-northwest course. You see where it is with respect to the big island of Hawaii. I don't see any upper low. There's I do see a lot of dry air though. It looks like skies, fairly clear over the Hawaiian Islands and in a large area around it. And this is something that we see many times. You get these major hurricanes in the east central Pacific, and they're chugging along, and then they get to about 145, 150 west, and they almost always start to weaken there. There is a almost a semi-permanent protective shield over the island of Hawaii when it comes to storms coming in from the east.
Yeah, I mean, if they come right in at the Big Island, they're gonna get ripped apart. It seems like the strongest ones are the ones that sneak underneath and then recurve, go north,
or the ones that form south of the Hawaiian Islands, which happens from time to time. Exactly. So Douglas, as the Hurricane Center on their forecast for Douglas, and where is he? There he is. Okay, so they are actually. This is interesting. It's a little bit slightly further to the north, but they're maintaining hurricane status here as it goes by the Big Island, and still have it as a hurricane crossing the main islands west of the Big Island, 2 p.m. Sunday. 2 a.m. Sunday making its final approach, and then moving right along and going on a straight west-northwest course. And that east-west ridge that we have over the southern half of the United States extends out into the Atlantic almost all the way across, but it also extends about halfway across the Pacific. It's a very, very long, almost looks like a tube, the upper high, that's just sort of basically stretched out from east to west. Uh, fairly unusual to see that. You get these little troughs that oftentimes there'll be some troughs in between, some weak troughs, but to see that, it's almost a solid wall and everything wanting to move from east to west, it's a little strange.
Yeah, well, that like I said, uh, I know probably lead to like more of a season where the deep tropics see more activity. If that holds going into the season rather than let's say along the East Coast. Although I think we do have our we do have our window of opportunity depending on how things transpire with the disturbance that's off the African coast. That's still way too far away to get.
All right, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the long range pattern over North America. And I've got the new GFS goes out to 192 hours. And if we need to want to go further than that, because we know how wonderfully accurate it is, out to 360, we could switch back to the 6C. Now I'm looking here again. This sort of narrow ridge. We have this northwest flow out of Canada that's been kind of sitting along the Canadian border, and we see it flare up from time to time, and you get bringing a short wave to come down and kind of lower the jet a little bit in the Northeast. We seem to have one of those early next week. There's an upper low in James Bay, lowers the heights a bit down into the mid-Atlantic states. Then it lifts up, and there is some troughing that gets left behind along the East Coast late next week. Uh, what's your feeling about the whole setup of the upper air over North America, the way it's been this summer? Has anything struck you as being unusual?
Well, I mean, one thing that's been unusual. Not going to talk so much in terms of the upper low, but just in terms of where a thunderstorm has been coming from. Everything's coming from the north. Usually
Yes.
we things trucking across from the west. It's been kind of unusual in that regard. We've had a lot of and that's I guess been because of upper lows passing off to our north for the most part. Um,
We
you know,
no
I,
longer, even though I sit my own personal boilerplate here on Long Island with regards to missing out on thunderstorms that are literally blocks away from me, and I don't seem to see a thing out of them. But in general, you and I have talked about that very broad thunderstorm cycle that seems to be part of the microclimate here, where here where you and I are on Long Island, where there's this sort of this 5 year cycle of ups and downs in terms of thunderstorms, and we seem to be in that uptrend. We had a 5 year down lack of thunderstorm activity, but it seems like last year it picked up a little bit, and this year it seems to have picked up quite a bit more.
if we just get some, I'm sort of in the same hole that you're in, and don't see too many thunderstorms. Seems like even last night, most of them were out over the water, over the
Right.
sound. Great lightning show to the south as I was coming home from work after midnight. That was spectacular.
Now I'm seeing out by around day 10 on the GFS on the old run, uh, part of that trough that moves off the East Coast and gets left behind from New York City southwest into Alabama and Georgia, uh, sort of drops back, and there's an upper low sitting in Tennessee and Kentucky. Uh, so there's a little bit of a hole there. The question is, are we going to have a tropical system that's going to work its way around that? That's the question. And there does seem to be troughing that hangs back between 80 and 90 west right through the forecast period, although it's not really very strong. But you need to have something, uh, some kind of trough in the east, and some kind of weakness in that ridge in order to get something to make the turn and move up up the East Coast, and that's a very that doesn't that's something you're threading a very fine needle in order to have that happen. Correct?
Yeah, I agree. And now you're looking at the GFS. I'm here looking at the European ensemble. They sort of show the same thing, but I mean, the two things that stand out to me is that that narrow ridge that you were talking about. It looks like it hangs tough across Florida, and you know, a lot with winter storms. A lot of times we say it's all about the high, the position of the high, and
Right.
that's for hurricanes that impact the East Coast. I don't see there's no high. You got to go either across Florida where the narrow ridge is, or for like the big subtropical high. That's way out east. So I think if anything made a run at the coast, it'd probably be Florida and then make a recurve.
Right.
If
If we follow I have the European up on the 500, and the what you're seeing on the European is on the 144 hour of last night. Something is coming in east of the Leeward and Windward Islands. That's not Gonzalo, moving into the Eastern Caribbean. But in this particular instance, the European actually shows a feature there that moves along and then winds up going into the Northwest Caribbean. Now, the run before that was taking it up to the Bahamas. So, this is going to be the run-to-run variability. The models seem to be keying on something happening, as particularly the European seems to be keying on something happening in that broad area that we might want to call the Southeast, the Bahamas, into the Gulf of Mexico, Northwest Caribbean. But that's the best we can do 10 days out. It's not like we can pinpoint it's going to be more to the east as opposed to being more to the west. There's too many variables in the atmosphere to prevent you from making that kind of a conclusion.
exactly, I squint my eyes when I'm looking at the models and figure like, you got to make this a lot fuzzier than it looks on the maps. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'll bring up. I'm going to bring up the North Atlantic view because I think we'll be able to see it a bit better on this one. And you, so let's go back. So what you look, folks, on these maps, on the upper air maps, it's a little different. You're gonna have to look for more subtle features sometimes to pick out your tropical system. So I have on here the 96 hour, and I just moved it over to the 120. So what we'll be talking about is there's this I'm circling a feature that is east of the leeward. So that would be the one that the model takes west or west northwest. There's actually another one right behind it coming off the Cape Verde Islands. So the European seems to suggest that the busy pattern in the tropics is going to continue. And if you follow the one that's east of the leewards along, you see it there in the Central Caribbean, and then it runs up into the Northwest Caribbean. Again, this is pure speculation because it's so far out. But I'm watching upstream, Bill. You see how there's a deep trough that swings through the east, but there's another short wave that comes down through the Dakotas and then drops into the middle Mississippi Valley. And if you watch how the system in the tropics reacts to it, it seems like that is the alleyway. That shortwave is going to create the alleyway. We just don't know where that alleyway is going to be because the timing may be different as we go into the next. We go to today's run and tomorrow's run and the next day's run.
Yeah, I agree. That'll change. A lot of times they come in more slowly than their forecast when you get out at that time range. Where's the upper ridging going to be? It seems like you had just at least in the ensembles right now, you just have that narrow ridge just holds strong, and it seems like if anything were to impact the East Coast, it wouldn't have much of a chance. It seemed like it would find the weakness and then recurve one way or the other, whether out to sea or back underneath it. This is all speculation too.
I just put up the surface map where it has a 979 pressure there, but let's back it up. And yeah, there's it does on the surface. It certainly looks like it would be deep enough, 1,005 or 1,003 coming in over the islands, and then it strengthens as it moves into the Northwest Caribbean. So the European certainly is giving us a rather bullish view of things with regards to whatever's going to be going on down the road. At least certainly is going to be something to watch.
I think so. And when I think of this time of year, like going into early August, storms following a path that go into the Caribbean. I think of some of the real big ones fall into that category. So yeah, I think it will be very interesting to watch, see how this plays out.
And in the meantime, by the way, at least as far as our local weather is concerned, um, we had this weak front go by, and it's just kind of lingering today. It does look as if we're going to be on the edge of this heat ridge again over the weekend. I was a little disappointed because the models earlier this week were trying to bring some kind of dew point relief at least for us for tomorrow and Sunday. I think whatever dew point relief we get out of this is going to be minor. And then Sunday, I thought with a west, would look like a west wind, we probably could see temperatures back up into the 90s.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're setting up for another 3, maybe 4 days, I guess, depending on how warm it gets tomorrow of 90-degree heat. That's yeah. I thought we were going to get a break this weekend, but it's starting to look less and less like that. I agree with you.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you the question. We're back up full screen. I pulled the maps up. By the way, I don't. Unless it's a teeny tiny pop up shower or thunder shower somewhere tomorrow or Sunday. I think we may go the whole weekend without seeing without seeing shower or thunderstorm activity.
Knock on wood. I did see, I did see some possibilities for that tomorrow that also didn't exist when we looked like we're going to have a drier, more decidedly drier forecast. So who knows? I'm even wondering if, with the rain that's even moved south of us right now, moving south of Long Island, whether we could still see a pop-up shower late today. Maybe if the sea breeze gets going on Long Island, that might be something to watch out for later. So yeah, not as dry as we'd like, but also not a washout either by any means.
No, not at all. So I'll just give you this left field question. Well, actually, there's two things I want to bring up. But first off, so there's been the links on the Weather Service pages with regards to watches and warnings and advisories that they're going to be making some changes to them, and I'm just wondering what your sense of all of that is. In some respects, and this is my never to be humble opinion, it got to a point where I thought that there were just too many advisories for too many things. I'm exaggerating if I say a mist advisory or a drizzle advisory.
We're not going to get
it's no. But I'm just saying it seemed like there was a bit of overkill from that respect. Now, my understanding is what normally would have been something that would have qualified as a winter weather advisory is probably not going to get any kind of special designation other than, say, a special weather statement or a special weather discussion of some kind. Am I understanding that? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And certain things that are treated as advisories are going to end up going to warnings. So,
such as.
I think there's like for boaters, a small craft advisory is going to become a small craft warning.
Which is years ago. That's what it was. They used to call them years ago. They used to call them small craft warnings, and then they went to the advisory thing, the advisory terminology.
Now that I didn't know. Boy, that's even before.
I was. Now I'm a little older than you, okay, by a handful of years. But when I was in my day, it was. I think it was sometime in the 70s that they switched to the word advisory versus. They used to call them small craft warnings.
All right. Yeah, I might have been. I might have started paying attention right after that. That's
now what happens to the dense fog advisory? Just for curiosity's sake.
Well, I guess certain things we're still going to issue statements. I think the concentration is going to be, to have put more of our emphasis on the warning aspect. Things that kind of fall into this advisory thing. Well, yeah, we'll still issue statements on them. It's, we're calling it hazard simplification. Yes, I guess it is in one way. In another way, maybe it's not. I mean, it's not like there's going to be I think the level of service that we provide is still going to be the same. It's just
Right.
it's treat these things. We're not going to be bombarding everybody with a bunch of products that maybe we have been doing of late, as you mentioned.
But we're, Tony M on the board, uh, says, instruct, this is a phrase of, like, quote, dumbing down with regards to the public, and I don't know if that's the right phrase to use, but I think the sentiment might be correct in that, a lot of times the message gets lost. And that's not our fault. I really don't think it's our fault. I think there's just it's the natural tendency for most people, and I do it, you do it, maybe on different subject matters. We tend to listen to every other word or every other sentence. So oftentimes you might not get the message that that's intended. And I wonder whether sometimes with certain things, advisories where, it may be a mistaken notion that something is maybe more serious than it otherwise would be. You understand where I'm going with this?
Oh, I agree with you 100%. And the one thing that comes up every winter is that the freezing rain event that nobody anticipates, and everybody goes out on the road, and there are accidents everywhere. That to me, that's like a warning level type of thing that doesn't really get.
I totally agree with you on that. The freezing rain advisory, that's a tough one. That's one of those instances where, uh, magnitude is everything. I mean, you could get just a little bit of mist that forms a glaze, and then suddenly you've got 100 cars, 100 car wrecks on the highway. So yeah, it's a bit tough, and it's also something that doesn't always. It's not always in front of you. You get a lot of situations where you think it's going to happen and it doesn't. Then you get a lot of some situations where you think it's not going to happen and it does. It makes it very, very tricky
Yeah, yeah. I
as
mean,
a
those.
forecaster.
Yeah, unless you have like a big ice storm that's coming right at you, and the model's been showing it for days. They are difficult. It's these marginal things where maybe we have a dry forecast, and all of a sudden some rain develops near Philly, and then it spreads up in the metro area, and the temperatures are below freezing. Very difficult.
John
More than a few of those.
John Curtis says that Dr. Fauci could Dr. Fauci blame the weather for the wild pitch yesterday. Now, I have never had the experience, but I was watching CNBC this morning, and one of the anchor, Joe Kernan, was given the opportunity to wants to throw the opening pitch at for, I think, the Cincinnati Reds, because that's his hometown. And he described the fact that it was probably one of the most nerve-wracking experiences that he had ever had. And the ball just, when he threw the ball, it didn't go where it was supposed to go, to the catcher's mitt. Yeah, that's got to be an overwhelming experience.
Oh,
To throw the first pitch.
I can imagine. No, put me on the mound at Yankee Stadium. I'll be just as nervous too. Not that that's going to happen anytime soon.
Right. All right. Let's wrap it up with this, Bill, because I've already seen a couple of winter forecasts that, which of course you and I both know the rule. You cannot, all winter forecasts for the Northeast must be below normal temperatures and above normal snowfall. There really is no other forecast than that. So with that in mind, uh, and people do ask me this, and I'm sure they ask you, let's dispel a couple of things. The correlation between the kind of hurricane season you have and the kind of winter that follows. No real correlation.
I don't know. I'll say the jury's out on that. I think of the '95 hurricane season was pretty active, and we ended up with we know how that winter ended up. Yeah, and I mean maybe it's a loose correlation. I mean,
But no
Yeah,
one's been able to yet make the firm tie, though. There's no real, like, a loose correlation if you want to make one, okay. But there's no, and again, this is also one of those things where everybody's in their own little bubble, and it's all about the geography they occupy. Uh, it doesn't necessarily mean that, is it favorable more for coastal areas as opposed to inland areas? Is it a mix of is it a mix of the two? I just find that to use it as a direct connection, I think I think it gets you into some trouble if you say that an active season automatically means you're going to have a very active, snowy, cold winter.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be looking at the activity of the season so much as what drove the active hurricane season and what's going to drive the winter. In this case, in this upcoming winter, it looks like La Nina is probably going to be the
All right, now let's address that, okay? Because last year the conventional wisdom was no La Nina, no El Nino. We had La Nada, as it was put by many. So there was no impact from there in either direction. And the idea was that, well, with the El Nino and La Nina not a factor, this should be a winter. The last winter should have been a rather cold and, let's say, snowy winter. Uh, and what happens? The polar vortex wraps up in a way that it usually does in strong El Nino or strong La Nina years. So, have you seen anybody yet address what happened, the reasonings behind what happened last winter? I
uh,
haven't seen anything. I'm just asking you if you have.
yeah. Well, I mean, what you say is true. The polar vortex staying up in the high latitudes until we wanted winter to end, and then of course it came down.
Right. And then if you remember the winter before, if you remember the winter prior to this, the polar vortex did everything it was supposed to do. It split. It split, and people were saying, "Oh, this is going to be, particularly for the second half of the winter," because I think if I remember correctly, the split occurred sometime in January, and that didn't work either. That didn't make any difference. Is it what happens if you make the case that the polar vortex in the stratosphere drives everything, okay? If that is the primary driver, doesn't that have to uh, doesn't that have to correlate down to the lower levels of the atmosphere in order for that to be true? And if it doesn't correlate all the way down, then all bets are off.
Well, I mean that's part of it. It's the tropical regions too. El Nino and La Nina. We're looking more at the MJO, the Madden Julian oscillation. I mean, you got to be in. I mean, all these things that need to line up. All these teleconnections need to line up and to be favorable.
And they just didn't do it last year. It just didn't
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. It's funny. Normally, I do a pretty detailed winter weather outlook. Last year, I didn't really have a good feel for what was going to happen. I just found myself looking at El Nino and La Nina phases, where we were going to go. It seemed like I know there were folks that were. I think some folks were expecting an El Nino event to develop in the Central Pacific, and that's that Modokai El
The
Nino.
Mordecai El Nino, yes.
I didn't. I don't know what the basis for that was. I didn't really see that. I saw it staying like more like you said in La Nada territory, like a little bit warmer than average, but not enough to be called an El Nino. I went back and looked at past New York City winters, and the great majority of those were less snowy and warmer than usual. But there were a couple of outliers, and those were all snowy winters. So I hedged. I remember when I did my outlook, I hedged my forecast because I really didn't know how that was going to play out.
And of course, we have the annual negative North Atlantic oscillation that never happens in the wintertime anymore. Last
Yeah,
year, it was there in November and into the early part of December, and people were getting excited. All the weather geeks were getting excited over this. Oh, the NAO was super negative NAO, and then that just went away like it almost always does. I think back to the winters of 9, 10, and 10, 11, where the North Atlantic Oscillation, which for folks who are new to this, higher than normal pressures up in the North Atlantic, Greenland, and points east, and also back into Labrador, and then there's a few other other things that go to that to figure out that equation. But when you have higher than normal pressures up there, it usually favors, and lower than normal pressures in the mid latitudes, it usually favors colder air coming into the Northeast. It is just you go back to the winters of 9, 10, 10, 11, where that negative NAO was there for virtually the entire time, both those winters, and you wonder that has to, obviously, that seems to be just an anomaly, because we haven't seen anything like it since.
Well, it'll come back. If we get a winter where the polar vortex is going to split or move, we could get. But even with those types of things in the wintertime, polar vortex split or move, that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll get a negative NAO. I mean, the cold air could end up going toward Europe, toward Siberia.
And you and I've said this to you many times. Give me a negative East Pacific oscillation any day. I will take that. The NAO I could care less about, because it just doesn't happen that often. But that East Pacific oscillation seems to be far more important than the NAO. You give me that, I'll take that. If you give me the negative EPO, I'll take my chances with the rest of it.
I agree with that. I mean, you're setting up high latitude blocking toward Alaska. That means you got a much better shot at cold air coming down here, at least.
Yeah.
And even with the NAO, it's more the phase change. If it holds strong, we're just going to be cold. The storm track probably to our south need to change so that
you want that NAO to gravitate toward the neutral line, from a deeply negative, and then go up to the neutral line, because usually when it's making that big change, as you just mentioned, that's when you wind up with some kind of a storm somewhere.
Yeah, exactly, or at least more of a chance that it comes up this way. So you want it, you want the phase change. You don't want it to happen. It's like you don't want it to happen too quick. If it doesn't happen at all, storm track goes to our south. These things are subtle, and I could see why the Climate Prediction Center doesn't want to get too much in the business of forecasting at least the NAO. That's too short term. The AO, I think I think folks like Judah Cohen are showing that there's enough skill that
you might be able to pull that off. And we know that the AO was positive virtually all of last winter.
Mm-hmm.
When the AO is the Arctic oscillation. Pressure changes in the Arctic, folks. So when you have the AO negative up in the Arctic regions, that usually displaces cold air south into the mid latitudes, which is where we occupy.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyhow, did you?
I do have one last thing. I do remember seeing something about we look in the tropics as well as the Arctic for clues. I guess there was something about the something called the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation. I guess it has to do with changes in the stratospheric winds in the tropical Pacific.
Yes.
And there was some kind of, I'm going by memory here, and it's and I'm not remembering it very well. There was some kind of unusual change that some kind of anomaly that took place recently that probably is going to have some feedback on what happens with us in terms of winter. Because I guess what goes on down there, that there's a transfer of momentum from the tropics to the Arctic region, and that can drive things like the EPO and all those all those things go in the Arctic. So next time we get together, I'm gonna have to pull that out, and we'll have something to talk about
over some alcohol.
Yeah.
Because you should never look at those kind of things without at least a little bit of alcohol. You understand it far better when you have some alcohol in your system.
Well, at least you don't take yourself too seriously when looking at it.
Right. Sure. Only kidding, folks. We're sober people. Okay. All right, Bill. I always have a good time when you come on the show, and I really appreciate it very much. Thank you for popping in. And
thanks, I enjoy it too. It's always spur of the moment too, so that's
which is fine. I by the way, I now this is also going to be in a podcast format. So You can listen to the replay while you're, uh, I don't know, mowing the lawn or taking a jog or on your treadmill, uh, rearranging your, you know, whatever it is you might be rearranging. I don't know. But yeah, we're in podcast moments, so we're on Google Podcasts, Spotify. I think we're also on iTunes as well. So for those of you who would like to listen to these shows while you're doing other things, just look for Just look for them under the Joe and Joe Weather Show on your favorite podcast site. Okay, and then tonight at 7, Joe and I will be on. Joe Rayo will be with me on the usual nighttime Joe and Joe Weather Show, and that's at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. So we will see you then. All right, Bill. You're always welcome. Thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. I got to get myself a cool background like you have, though. That's the next.
Oh yeah, it's all chroma key. The Zoom video is amazing. The things that you can do with it, and I figured let me figure something out, and I found this graphic that somebody made for me for the Joe and Joe show. Let me just move over so you can see.
That's neat.
And, yeah, so it is kind of cool.
All right. It says OJ and OJ backwards, at least the way I see it. So we got.
Are you seeing it flipped?
I'm seeing it flipped from where I am. See the OJ and OJ show.
Oh, okay. See, I had to flip it so that you could actually, when you replay it, you'll see it the way you're supposed to see it.
Oh, I see.
Right. All right.
So if everyone's seeing it normal, never mind what I just said.
What how are you seeing it? Are you seeing it on YouTube?
No, I'm seeing it in Zoom, and it's
okay. So in Zoom, it flipped it back for you, but then on YouTube, it's the right way. Okay.
Oh, I see. See, that's what happened. We didn't have any alcohol in this, and see what happens. Everything ends up backwards then. So
yeah, exactly. And your KKINS 100 says I'm getting high tech. Yeah, I'm getting a little more sophisticated. I've never been afraid of tech. Some people are my age. As I said earlier, I am a little older than you, but there are some people my age that just never grasped onto technology at all, and there are still a few holdouts out there. They just want no part of it. But my mother's not one of them. My mother she's got her iPhone and she's got her Mac, and she does everything online, and it's amazing. And my mom's 85, and she's surfing the web on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's you keep the fascination going. I think it's great. I mean, I'm sitting here in what looks like a basement, but it's a recording studio. I got all kinds of gear around me. So
you know what? Before we go, talk about your band. I mean, I know you haven't been able to play because of everything going on, but talk about your band.
Oh, all right. Yeah, the band that I'm in, it's called the Mondays. It's been around for 20-something years. I've only been for since about 2013 or so, playing guitar. So what do we do when we don't play? We write songs. Our singer has a whole bunch ready to go, and he's in the studio recording one for real today. When I get done here, I'm going to be spending a couple hours getting a couple of demos together for some other songs. So yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. Keep keep our fascination and our interest up when when we can't go out and perform or when just this whole virus business has us shut down. That's the way to get on top of it.
Yep. All right. See you soon, everybody. Again, 7 o'clock tonight, Joe and Joe Weather Show. We'll see you then, and we'll update you on Gonzalo, Hanna, Douglas, and anything else that happens to pop up between now and then.